Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 690, and today is October 15th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to talk about on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. Of course, it's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, where I post all my articles and all the shows that I do. So it's a great way to keep up with all my work. All right, here we go. This one, Dave DeCamp, October 14th, antiwar.com. Maybe a little bit of good news when it comes to Ukraine. Report, Ukraine considers ceding territory to end war with Russia. So the Ukrainian government is considering its options to end the war with Russia that would involve ceding territory, a German outlet reported on Sunday, citing a Ukrainian official. The report said it was the first time since the Russian invasion of February 2022 that a Ukrainian leadership has considered a deal that wouldn't involve getting back all the territory that Russia has captured since February of 2022. Under a peace deal that was on the table in March and April of 2022, Russia would have withdrawn its forces to the pre-invasion lines, but that deal was discouraged by the US and other NATO countries who urged the Ukrainians to fight Russia instead. Over the past 2 years, Ukrainian President Zelensky has been pushing for a peace formula that calls for a Russian withdrawal from Ukraine before peace talks can even happen, which is a non-starter for negotiations with Moscow. So the Ukrainian official said, "We believe that victory had to mean the unconditional surrender of Putin's Russia." The official then acknowledged that that was not a realistic view, saying a deal must be also beneficial for Russia. The report comes as Russian forces continue to make gains in eastern Ukraine, which have become more rapid in recent months. Ukrainian forces still hold a small chunk of Russia's Kursk Oblast, but Russian troops are slowly pushing them back. The Ukrainian official said that Kiev believes the U.S. will slowly wind down its support for Ukraine, whether Vice President Kamala Harris or former President Trump wins the presidential election in November. Trump is running on ending the war, while Harris is vowing to continue supporting Ukraine. So the official said, whether it's Trump or Harris, the Americans will slowly but surely withdraw. The prognosis is poor. Now, I think he's kind of correct about that. I think it's not necessarily that the Americans will intentionally wind down their support. I think there's probably going to be logistics and supply chain issues, particularly if the U.S. gets embroiled in a major war in the Middle East. Let's remember, on the imperial pecking order here, Israel definitely sits atop Ukraine, and so if there's supplies needed in both Ukraine and Israel, my guess is Israel gets them and not Ukraine. Now, the other thing I think is that Washington is essentially running out of escalations that won't lead to a nuclear war with Russia. And so, as we are approaching the upper barrier of what the U.S. can give to support Ukraine, I think the Ukrainians should realize it's not necessarily that Trump or Kamala Harris will curtail U.S. support, but simply that they can't continue to heap on support like Joe Biden did that kept this war going for so long. Now, one of the other things I think is always important to remember when we're talking about negotiating the end to the war in Ukraine is that the people on my side who have been advocating for the U.S. to stay out of this conflict also have been advocating that there's things that Washington can do to help Kiev at the negotiating table. It doesn't simply have to be that Russia dictates terms to Kiev. Washington and its allies in NATO could negotiate, say, ending potential membership into the alliance from not only just Kiev, but also from Georgia as well. Also, maybe just no more countries that border Russia will join the NATO alliance, something like that. They could talk about removing NATO military assets from countries that border Russia, maybe de-escalation around the Russia exclave of Kaliningrad. I think most importantly, the Aegis Ashore missile sites in both Poland and Romania. These use the Mk-41 Lockheed-made launchers that can fire nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. These present a real threat to Russia. And so I think if the U.S. was willing to negotiate on the positions of those missile launchers, then Russia may be willing to cede back a little bit of Ukrainian territory. And so there may be room for the US to help Ukraine get a better deal here, but everybody has to be willing to negotiate. Now, with that said, it does look like the U.S. is preparing to give the Ukraine long-range weapons. So the U.S. top military commander in Europe said that long-range cruise missiles were among weapon systems that are crucial to send to Ukraine. I wrote this article for the Institute on the 10th. So CNN obtained an annex from a classified report compiled by Commander of European Command General Christopher Cavoli that lists weapons platforms that Kiev currently does not have that could benefit Ukraine. That list includes the Lockheed Martin Joint Surface-to-Air Standoff Missile, or the JASSM, cruise missile fire from F-16s with a range of 230 miles and a 1,000-pound warhead. Additionally, on the list is the Link 16, a data sharing network used by US and NATO. Cavoli did not explain his report why Ukraine has not received the weapons. Sources told CNN that Link 16 was being withheld over concerns the technology could fall into Russian hands. Officials told the White House, told the outlet that the White House has not signed off on the JSSM transfer because it assesses that the missile will not be useful to Ukraine until Ukraine has air superiority. Currently, the F-16s that the West has transferred to Ukraine are limited to operations far from the front lines. Kiev has requested that Washington transfer the JASSMs to Ukraine. Sending the long-range cruise missile to Ukraine risks further escalation in the proxy war between Russia and NATO. Top Russian official has had threatened to respond if Ukraine begins conducting attacks inside Russia with long-range missiles. And President Vladimir Putin has altered the Kremlin's nuclear doctrine to allow for the use of strategic weapons in response to such an attack. However, the risk of Moscow using nuclear weapons may not deter the Biden administration from crossing Russia's red lines. According to Bob Woodward, in 2022, the White House believed there was a 50% chance Russia could use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but continue to escalate support for Ukraine anyways. All right, next up here, UK denies Zelensky's request to use long-range missiles and strikes on Russia. So Ukrainian President Zelensky met with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London on Thursday and again asked for permission to use the British-provided long-range missiles for strikes inside Russian territory, but was denied. A spokesperson for Starmer said the UK has not lifted the restrictions on the Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of about 155 miles, and added that no war has ever been won by a single weapon, and there's no change in the government's policy on the use of long-range missiles. According to Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader emphasized to Starmer the need to obtain permission to strike deep into the territory of Russia. Last month, the US and UK appeared poised to start supporting long-range Ukrainian strikes inside Russia, but backed down after Russian President Vladimir Putin issued serious warnings. Putin said taking steps would put NATO in direct war with Russia and then change the nuclear doctrine. One of the changes made it to consider an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state that is supported by a nuclear armed power would be treated as a joint attack. And so as France, the UK, US all have nuclear weapons, are supporting the Ukrainian war effort, if they conducted a long-range strike inside Russia, Russia could respond as if it was an attack on its facilities by a nuclear power. So Zelensky also met with NATO Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Tuesday, who downplayed the idea of supporting long-range strikes. He said, let's not focus on one system, one weapon system at all. It will not be one weapon system which will make the change. And he also was appointed as the head of NATO. He is now the Secretary General of the alliance, as well as being the Dutch Prime Minister. So Rutte did express some support for NATO allowing the long-range strikes, insisting it was legal, but said it was still up to individual countries. He said that is up to the allies, the individual allies, to decide how weapons they deliver into Ukraine can be used. All right, tensions also flaring in the South China Sea here. China conducts blockade drills around Taiwan and warning against Taiwanese independence. So, the Chinese People Liberation Army conducted a blockade drill around the island of Taiwan on Monday and said the military exercises were aimed at warning against Taiwanese independence. So, the Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman Wu Qin said the drills were directed at to a speech the Taiwanese President William Lai Chang-te delivered this past Tuesday. Lai said that Taiwan, officially known as the Republic of China, will not subordinate to mainland China, known as the People's Republic of China. Wu said that Lai and others were forgetting their roots and deliberately severing historical ties across the Taiwan Strait and inciting a conflict. Taiwan has never been a country and will never become one, Wu said. The Chinese blockade drills, officially dubbed Joint Sword 2024B exercises, were carried out to the north, south, and east of Taiwan and in the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry said that throughout Monday, it detected 17 Chinese naval vessels and 17 Chinese Coast Guard vessels around Taiwan. According to the South China Morning Post, the PLA said Monday evening that it conducted the drills around Taiwan, and the PLA's spokesman said that the military had fully tested the integrated joint operation capabilities around Taiwan. China conducted its first blockade drill around Taiwan in August of 2022 in response to then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi making a provocative visit to the island despite major protests from Beijing. In April 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy met with the Taiwan's former president Tsai Ing-wen in California, provoking another Chinese blockade drill. In his statement on the drills, Wu issued a warning against outside interference, referring to the U.S. increasing their support for Taiwan. Wu said relevant parties should cease supporting Taiwan independence and stop undermining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. China has been warning the U.S. strongly against ever-growing military and diplomatic support for Taiwan, calling it the, quote, first red line in the U.S.-China relationship that must never be crossed. But the Biden administration is ignoring the concerns and recently approved $567 million in an arms package for Taiwan. Now, that's not the only place in the region that tensions are heating up. North Korea threatens war with South Korea over drone flights to Pyongyang. So tensions are soaring on the Korean Peninsula as North Korea is threatening war with the South over drone flights near Pyongyang. Seoul says it is prepared for war should a conflict break out. On Monday, a spokesman for North Korea said tensions have reached a grave touch-and-go level. Pyongyang emphasized that this is due to the South Korea's wanton violation of the sovereignty of North Korea with infiltrations of drones into its capital city. Pyongyang is accusing Seoul of operating 3 drones in Pyongyang and dropping leaflets that insult the North Korean government. So the officials explained there is a high possibility of South Korea's additional drone infiltration into our airspace above the border and the capital city. North Korea conducted relevant undertakings to fully prepare units at all levels for coping with any developments of the situation, and it is impossible to rule out the possibility of an ensuing extended arms conflict, the statement said. Also added in the North Korean statement is that the military command placed artillery units along the border and the units taking on an important firepower task to get fully ready to open fire. Seoul did not confirm or deny that one of its drones have flown to Pyongyang. The South Korean military responded to the North Korean statement saying Seoul was fully ready for an attack from Pyongyang. The South Korean military command ordered its border forces to be ready for any North Korean fire. To prepare for the conflict, Pyongyang has ordered the destruction of some roads in North Korea connecting the peninsula's 2 sides. And somewhat unsurprisingly, I guess, this occurred this morning right before I came on to record this show, and I saw some of the images and big explosions. It seems, the easier way to do this and the cheaper way to do this probably was with a couple of bulldozers or something like that, just drag up the roads. But no, they're going to use explosives for this. So tensions on the Korean Peninsula have ratcheted up throughout the Joe Biden administration. The White House has claimed that it's open to talks with Pyongyang, although Washington has increased its military posture in the region, provoking Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. Washington's formation of a military bloc between Japan and South Korea and other Asia-Pacific nations is of particular concern to Pyongyang, saying they're trying to create an Asian NATO. Now, of course, the White House will say, oh, well, this is all really about China, but of course, North Korea sees it as a threat as well. All right, next up here, getting to the Middle East. State Department approves $2.2 billion in arms sales for Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The Biden administration has approved a series of arms sales for Saudi Arabia and the UAE worth a combined total of $2.2 billion. The Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency, the DSCA, said on October 11th that the State Department approved one potential sale for the UAE for GMLRS precision-guided rocket systems and attack munitions and related equipment, estimated to be $1.2 billion. The DSCA announced 3 separate arms deals for Saudi Arabia, which came after reports that said President Biden was preparing to resume selling offensive weapons to the kingdom. One is for air-to-air Sidewinder missiles at an estimated $250 million. Another deal is for 1,000 air-to-ground Hellfire missiles, which will cost about $655 million. The final sale is for a series of different types of ammunition for artillery systems, tanks, and machine guns. The U.S. sees the Gulf Arab states as potential allies in an Israel-Iran war, but Saudi Arabia has distanced itself from the U.S.'s defense of Israel, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman recently hosted the Iranian foreign minister in Riyadh. The Saudis have wanted nothing to do with the U.S. bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen, which began in January. From 2015 until 2022, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, along with the UAE, waged a brutal war in Yemen, but a ceasefire has held relatively well since April of 2022, although U.S. sanctions are preventing the implementation of a lasting peace deal. Saudi Arabia and the UAE do not have a good track record with U.S. weapons, as both countries use them to brutalize civilians and weapons. The U.S. sold arms to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi during the war, and they ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Today, the UAE is fueling the brutal civil war in Sudan by covertly providing weapons to the rapid support forces. Saudi Arabia has also been accused of slaughtering African migrants at its border with Yemen. Hundreds of people just shelled and shot by Saudi machine gun positions. Absolutely horrific what's happening there. All right, let's get into my debrief today, the Libertarian Institute newsletter. Sign up for it at thelibertarianinstitute.org, top right-hand corner of the screen. Today's is titled, Biden Sends American Soldiers to Fight a War on Behalf of Israel. So President Joe Biden is risking the lives of 100 American soldiers by sending them to Israel to insulate Tel Aviv from the repercussions of its constant belligerence. The Bat story. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expanded his genocide in Gaza to a regional war. He has provoked Iran several times, including by killing Hamas's political chief in Tehran. Iran predictably responded by firing around 200 ballistic missiles at military targets in Israel. Tehran's attack did not kill civilians and only targeted military sites, giving Tel Aviv an off-ramp to de-escalate the situation. But Netanyahu knows he will have President Joe Biden's backing for a major attack on Iran. How large and what targets remain to be seen, but veteran reporter Andrew Coburn posted on X that Biden may have greenlit an attack on an Iranian nuclear facility. And so this is the tweet from October 14th from Andrew Coburn. It says, word in Washington is that Biden has approved Israeli strike on Iran's Natanz nuclear site. So, any significant Israeli strike on Iran that will require U.S. intelligence and logistics, if not direct support, will provoke an Iranian response. Since Iran's last attack caused damage in Israel, Biden is now sending 100 American soldiers to operate a THAAD air defense battery to help mitigate any additional Iranian retaliation. Let's be clear, sending American troops to a country at war is entering that war, which makes the U.S. troops legitimate targets. There is no hope that Congress will use its constitutional authority to rein in the executive and demand Biden withdraw the troops until a declaration of war is passed. And so, it's a real concern that we end up in a major Middle East conflict because of Biden's complete insanity. All right, next up here, Israeli forces kill Palestinians in Gaza over 62 Palestinians in Gaza over 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said that Israeli forces killed 62 Palestinians and injured 220 over the previous 24-hour period, bringing the death toll recorded since last October to 42,289 and the number of wounded to 98,684. The ministry's numbers don't account for the Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble and bodies that have been difficult for rescuers to reach in northern Gaza, where Israeli forces recently escalated attacks as a part of an ethnic cleansing campaign. The ministry said there are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets, and ambulances and civil defense crews cannot reach them. Early Monday morning, an Israeli strike targeted Palestinians sheltering in tents inside the grounds of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in central Gaza. The Israeli attack ignited fires in the camp, burning Palestinians alive. Hospital records show that at least 4 people were killed and 40 injured, but many of the wounded are not suspected to survive their burns. Mohammed Tahir, he's a volunteer surgeon, told Al Jazeera that many of the victims have burns on 60% to 80% of their bodies. Patients with significant high percentage burns, unfortunately, their fates is sealed. They won't even make it to the ICU. They will die. It's a horror show here. Honestly, sometimes I feel like this is not real life, that this can go on, and this degree of suffering is allowed to happen to people in this world, Tahir said. Israel confirmed that it targeted the hospital and claimed that it hit a Hamas command and control center, but of course offered no evidence. Just hours before the strikes on the tent camp, Israel targeted a school-turned-shelter in the Nusra refugee camp, killing 22 people, including 15 children. Schools sheltering displaced Palestinians have become a frequent target of the Israeli military, and many children are often killed in the strikes. The Biden administration continues to support the Israeli genocidal slaughter in Gaza, even as it has become clear that the Israeli government is not interested in ceasefire talks and is looking to annex the Strip. A senior Israeli Air Force official acknowledged last month that Israel's slaughter in the Gaza Strip wouldn't be possible without U.S. support, saying if not for U.S. military aid, Israel could not sustain operations for more than a few months. All right, end of the show today. Israeli strikes on northern Lebanon Christian village kill at least 22. This one, Jason Ditz at antiwar.com, October 14th. On Monday, Israeli warplanes carried out an attack on a small apartment building in the northern Lebanese village of Itu, a Christian majority in a Christian majority area. At least 22 people were killed in the attack, according to the Lebanese Red Cross, which said also at least 8 were wounded. There have been no official comments from the Israeli military on why they attacked a Christian majority village. That's not usually when the Israeli strikes don't appear to have any military. That isn't unusual when the Israeli strikes don't appear to have any military target or purpose. Speculation is that the primary target was primarily a revenge attack against Lebanon in general after Sunday's drone strike by Hezbollah against a northern Israeli military base killed 4 soldiers and wounded scores of others. Alternatively, Israeli media has been speculating on the attack, again a Christian village, said may have targeted a senior Hezbollah leader. There has been no official sign that this was the case, nor are there any those making any speculation offering any name to the potential Hezbollah figure that may have been targeted. This northern part of Lebanon has not been considered militarily significant throughout the ongoing Israel-Hezbollah conflict, and there hasn't been any Israeli attacks anywhere near this area since the 2006 war. Israeli attacks on explicitly Christian targets are not unheard of at any rate. Just last week, Israel launched a military strike against a Catholic church in the southern area of Tyre. They destroyed the church, killing 8 people, and still have offered no military justification for doing so. Already facing internal pariah status over the internet. Already facing a growing international pariah status over their attacks on the civilians in the Gaza Strip, the escalation of attacks on Lebanon seems like Israel is willing to risk even more backlash. All right, bye. That's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more throughout the week here.